I had a heck of a conversation with 3 Christian apologists on Testify's YouTube channel. I'm glad they invited me on. They were true gentlemen to allow me to come on to discuss with them. I honored and respected the conversation, and it didn't get crazy, but there's some highlights in this. I'm sure that videos will come from that conversation. This one in particular, I think is absolutely necessary to highlight for you. Michael Jones brought up something that I found fascinating, and I had a conversation with Dr. Richard C. Miller on the phone about this, and it was really interesting to hear the kind of brainstorming ideas that make sense of this. So I want you to hear what he says real quick. Then I want to emphasize my point.
If God does exist, and he did want to reveal himself to humanity, how is he supposed to do it without matching things that we would claim as myth or miracle? Like, what is he supposed to do?
That's what I was going back to
scour the myths and be like, okay, well, someone was born of a virgin. I can't do that. Well, someone, ascended into heaven. I can't do that. I mean, I feel like if I was an alien and I wanted to trick humans into thinking I was a god, I would do things that would fall in line with their own religious beliefs now. Like, I would do exactly what they thought would show divinity. Right. So it just seems like it's just very unfair to the theistic worldview to say things like, well, we see all these people who believed in mythology, these people believed in miracles. So that's just what any theist is. That's what all their beliefs are. I mean, like, what is God supposed to do in this situation? Just not make sure he does certain miracles that have never, ever been talked about before?
During this stream, I was trying to emphasize if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, it's a duck. And this common phrase we use for saying something is sounding like, looking like, smelling like, etc., is probably like the thing that people are oftentimes saying it's not. I am a little frustrated in the conversation about this because Michael Jones and I believe maybe the others were a little bit confused on why am I saying this? You're kind of making an equivocation fallacy by saying if it looks like that, then it's probably that. And I think that the only reason someone would make that claim is because they're honestly not treating all of this information in the similar category. You have to put it in a different category to assume it's something altogether different. What is that category? I want to use an example today, then jump into the past, then jump back into today. And here's my example. We have fiction today. Lord of the Rings, Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, Capcom, Marvel, and many non-historical or fictional writings today where some people take historical stuff or some verisimilitude and then they package it in fictional ways. Even many of our movies will say, based on a true story. Not true though. Based on. And so there's variations of fiction that we do today. In the ancient world, first century, really before and after, the common way of writing fiction like Homer's Odyssey, the Iliad, Virgil's Aeneid, and many other pieces of literature, just using the Greek and Roman context, even Jewish stories, you can say, oh, very fictional writing. I would even categorize Genesis in this fictional myth origin tale, okay? Well, what you do is you wrote fantastical stories that oftentimes had some type of birth. Look at Sargon's birth that you can compare in a way to what Moses' birth is. Sargon of Akkad. Here you have this Assyrian king who has this miraculous birth, similar to Moses' birth, where God is making sure that he's safe. Then we see the same kind of birth thing happening in Matthew when Herod's trying to kill all the infants. I've pointed this out before. In Suetonius' Lives of the Caesars, the Divine Augustus chapter, there is a portent of the birth of Octavian, the first major emperor of Rome. This guy was so important, he set the standard for the Roman emperors from that point forward, and he made such an impact that I think Rome never forgot his touch. This man's birth narrative is divine, miraculous. The Senate wants him put to death or wants to put children to death that were being reared up that year. Same thing we see in Matthew. Same thing we see in other birth narratives from Moses, Sargon of Akkad, etc. Now, here's my point. You got fictional writings about heroic figures, people you think are important, you write fiction about, whether it's their birth narratives, whether it's something they did during their life, miracles, miraculous claims, etc., can be categorized with this. That doesn't mean there weren't exorcists or what we see in third world countries today and in America as well, extending the length of someone's foot. Let me stretch the leg out. Oh, we're healing you. Things like that happen all the time. So knowing what's fiction and what's really a third world country kind of con or miracle that people are really conning people on, I would say for the most part, it's tough to tell in the literature, but I wouldn't say it's so tough to tell, especially when it's so fantastic. Some of the stuff that's being described seems highly fantastic. The way that they wrote is fiction about these heroic people, about Caesars, about demi-gods, heroes, mortal men who become gods, etc., about Jesus. This is my claim. This is what I'm saying. It's fiction. It's fiction. There's fiction. But we get to Jesus, and on this conversation, what ends up happening is they cannot see walk like a duck, talk like a duck, meaning I'm saying it looks similar to the fictions of the world. Instead, they go to Craig Keener, they go to these conservative apologist type scholars who say this literature, oh no, this is biography. Even if it were written in a biography type format, it has highly exaggerated claims and things that look like the fictions around them. Okay? Michael Jones kind of concedes and goes, so what? So what? Who cares? If I were an alien being, as you heard him say, or God, why wouldn't God, how would he manifest himself? Now, that's a question that I would leave up to God. I don't think that the wisest position that God could take is to work within the fictional trope that everyone who's using fiction to present your guy, to show the truth in a fictional avenue, along with the rest of these birth narratives, the rest of these post-mortem ascension narratives, these miraculous claims during their life type narratives. I don't think that would be the best avenue. Now, we jump to the past for a moment. I wanted to emphasize they wrote fiction about their figures. Christians will high-five me and be like, amen, Caesar Augustus didn't do that stuff. Amen, we don't believe that's miraculous about those people. But our guys, ooh, you're touching something sore, sacred. This is different, they say. Let's jump to the future for one moment. As Michael Jones said in that clip, right? Like, how would God reveal himself? He would do it with birth narratives. He would do it with the same fictional furniture of the ancient world that everyone is using for their guys. That's the model in which we would do. So what we would probably expect in the 21st century, if God was going to send his son today, that he would probably come from a different planet. And not only would he probably come from a different planet, but he'd probably be invincible in some way. And maybe, just maybe, he would be an ordinary person, but then would be putting on a cape, coming out of a phone booth, flying across town to save the innocent and those who can't defend themselves. He might be this vigilante who helps to save the weak and innocent from those who are taking advantage. That's right. He might look like Batman, or he might look like Spider-Man or Superman. He would work within the fictive trope that we have created for ourselves today. Now, I know this model falls apart at some point because none of us are thinking there's a real Clark Kent or there's a real guy behind the mask of Batman. We think they're turtles all the way down. And I know that some mythicists will use this argument and equate it to Jesus. I don't go there. But the fictive model of putting it onto real people and assuming these people really did have miraculous births, really did have post-mortem ascensions, etc., that's the model I would particularly look at and say, that's how God would reveal himself? So he would work within a model that dupes most people into believing those other models also, and yet we're supposed to know the truth from fiction by using the trope that fiction is using. This is why Justin Martyr clearly says, and I disagree with their interpretation, the apologist interpretation of this, that it's just to get people off his back, that he compares the other myths to Jesus. He says, we believe nothing different from what you guys do about the sons of Zeus, etc., with our Christ. And I think that model is there. He then goes on to say it's demons that are making these other stories look like our Christ, our Jesus. It was Satan. It was demons who knew that Jesus was coming, so they tricked everyone. Well, that's a heck of a way for God to really convey the truth. I would imagine there are better ways than using the fictional standard of the ancient world in literature than to go with that. Can't he go with something better? And so this is where divine hiddenness can be inserted as an option to think about. Like, God could easily make this simple so people don't get confused by looking at the fiction and saying, wow, that's fiction, that's fiction, that's fiction, that's fiction. That didn't happen, that didn't happen, that didn't happen. We all high five Christians with them on those other figures. It walks like a duck, it talks like a duck, it's a duck. And then we get to Jesus, and I'm saying the same thing. It walks, talks, smells, looks, the whole nine. But then they go, oh, whoa. You're trying to high five me? Bro, don't you know this is the one? This is the true one. This is the historical one. This one really happened. Now that just doesn't make sense. The prior probability of that being the case is far lower in light of the line of all of the fictions we see. Can you at least, my friends, understand what I'm saying? But no, they get it, or they'll say they understand, but no, it's not convincing at all. You're trying to equate these things, which is some fallacy of mine, they think. And at the end of the day, I'm saying no. And they go, well, no. We have criteria. Time, meaning how far from the event that supposedly is miraculous that happened was it written about and documented? We have plenty of examples outside the Gospels. Don't worry, my friends. Dr. Richard C. Miller and other academics are going to help me in documenting earlier than what we see. Paul's writing 15, 20 years after the Jesus situation happens. We have documentations that are closer in time on apotheosis narratives, on divine birth narratives, about living people, and the authors who are writing them are around while those people are alive. So time. Okay, if we could find closer sources, we will. What about distance? Are these people who are writing way far away, like some of them argue Apollonius of Tyana, not only in time, but distance? They're writing about this figure from far away? You know, some scholars actually point out they think Mark is writing in Rome. Palestine and Rome, where Rome is, two different geographical locations at a far distance. That doesn't mean they didn't know the geography or may not have visited this region at some point. I tend to think they get some of the geography locations quite on point. They go up to Jerusalem or going down to Jericho and stuff, or in the Galilee. When you're reading about in the Galilee, I've been there myself at these geographical locations. They seem to know some of the geography. Interesting. Now, did they have to be there? Maybe they visited because they're fans of Jesus. So they went to these locations where they heard rumors or stories. Who knows? But of course, Christian apologists want them to be eyewitnesses, et cetera, et cetera. Then we're down a whole different rabbit trail of trying to make a case. Anyway, the other one that really seemed to be emphasized, and I'll have to be digging into Tim McGrew's arguments on this. There's a long video that my friend Eric Manning sent me. And that is persecution is one they brought up during this discussion. As if like, why would they die for this? And I hear this so often from Christians. This is somehow to them so convincing that people would be willing to die. And then the time and geography, none of that validates the miraculous fictional claims about this person. That's what I'm trying to get at. You can be next door. My neighbor can be next door. Something can happen. I'm this close, and then I hear about it and I write about it. And people said, oh, over here, she cast out all these demons and levitated 10 feet off the ground and healed a blind woman. Okay. And I write about it. I'm right here. I'm right at the time it's happening. This somehow proves this point. Not really. In fact, people a day or two after Caesar died said they saw. Lucian of Samosata talks about an account we're going to get into with Dr. Richard C. Miller about a philosopher who went and cast himself into the pyre full of flames in front of everybody. And eyewitnesses the next day were talking about they saw a phoenix arise to Mount Olympus, the whole nine, in 24 hours. Holy smokes. You better start believing in that guy. No. When I say it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck. It looks like fiction, like common fiction that was told about other figures. And I know this is why I keep saying special pleading. This is why I keep saying this one's special, but all others aren't. And there are other things I'm sure come to mind where Christians go, but why did the religious movement survive? Or why did it become successful or whatever? Islam became successful and is growing and becoming more and more successful. That does not validate anything. But if you add all the tally points up, Derek, we have a cumulative case that makes our point. If you add up my points and consider, we have a cumulative case that shows, yeah, this is fiction. And there are plenty of issues with the New Testament. So while I get caught up in the comparative stuff and they want to get into the minutia detail of the New Testament and try to argue there, like they're missing the grand picture. And they'll say, yeah, Derek, you're looking at the forest and you're missing the trees. My channel gets into the trees too. We look at the bark. We're checking out the pine cone and the needles that fall from the pine trees. That's what the academics on my channel do. Many of the atheist channels out there don't hone in and zero in that close to the details. But MythVision not only looks at the forest, but we examine the trees. And the scholars we have on do not draw the conclusions that the apologist scholars are drawing. This is why I'm so thrilled and glad to put a spotlight on the academics who are not favoring special pleading, trying to put this on a pedestal as if this is more true than the other stuff around it. Historical methodology is what we use, which is not granting all of the miraculous claims here and then yet discounting all of those there or pretending like those aren't as true or as plausible as the Bibles. No, if the Bibles are plausible, all of them are plausible. And your criteria, there's better data in some of these check off on time, distance, persecution, etc. Many of those boxes check off for the non-Christian sources, even closer to the origin of the claim than Jesus. What's going on here? So anyone watching, and if you go into the comment section on Eric's video, this is not Eric's fault. Just like I get atheists who sometimes go down there and bash hardcore on Christians and think they're dishonest, the apologists, etc. And I understand why they think that. But I don't know, dishonesty assumes they're purposefully lying. And I really like to give the benefit of the doubt because I can't read their minds. I think that what's going on is that it's not they're purposefully lying or dishonest. I think they cherish this. So they're special pleading without recognizing that this is the same thing, same category. Jesus should show up in a cape, fly in the air, work at a print like a newspaper place like Superman, or be a vigilante like Batman. He's a hero. Even these heroes in some of the fictions or in some of these comic books die. So, what's the verdict at the end of the day? When I say it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, that's what I mean. And if God has to use fiction or go and make the true fiction, the true myth, C.S. Lewis might say, among all the not true myth, yet you're saying this one's not myth, that this one really happened. Wow. I think that you have so much working against that, in my opinion, versus it being true. Thank you for listening to me discuss this particular moment to give you the reason why I think two worlds are arguing and the battle of ideologies is happening online. The comment section on my channel, you'll be like, Derek, it's clear. We see what you're saying. Some might actually disagree with me and go, you're not seeing how this proves mythicism. Let's not make that about this, okay? But that's what you'll see, right? But most of all, they'll say, we see what you say and we get it. We're with you. We're on your side. You make sense. That makes sense. But to the Christian apologist and their community that's diehard within the bubble, they'll say, oh my gosh, you don't get it. Look at the specific details of Paul's 1 Corinthians 15 creed about eyewitnesses. And I think it's time that I actually start pulling up and looking at the specifics of the details about eyewitnesses when it comes to other figures and other claims, other births, other apotheosis, divination, whatever it might be, where they're deified into outer space, ascending in a cloud, or some other way into heaven, Mount Olympus, you name it. It's time to highlight those, because once you see enough of those and know that the Greek and Roman world at the time that Christianity started, that was their tradition. And they thought Hercules, Asclepius, Dionysus, Bacchus, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, these are the guys. These are the heroes. And these are the ones who did the things that we're seeing in these mythological fictional accounts. Now, maybe the philosophers may not have bought those accounts as actually happening, but I would imagine the common folk did to some degree. So it's a big question. I need to get Tim Whitmarsh back on my channel, because I'd be curious to get his thoughts, because he knows as a classicist, did they really believe their myths? I'm certain many did. And some of the more educated probably saw them as allegories or whatever. Then some didn't believe them at all. So thank you. I hope that you watched that video. It was me and 3 apologists having a wonderful conversation. I was very patient. I think they were patient with me, or we tried to be as much as we could, and it was a good conversation. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Like the video, share it out there, drop a comment down below for the algorithm, and help support us if you're interested in joining MythVision's team to keep seeing what we're doing here. Thank you so much. And enjoy the myth, my friends. Enjoy the myth.